Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to continue our look at the Legend of Kamui. We're up to issues 30 through 33, and this encompasses the penultimate chapter of the whole series. We got one more story arc to go after this. Number 30. Some more kind of weird colors. Better than some of the ones we've seen, though. Not as bad, not as garish. So this is Duel Before the Shogun Part 1. This is Chapter 6 of The Sword Wind. So the story is a flashback. Starts out 5 years ago, in April 1651. We're at the Edo Castle. Edo was the capital of Japan. That's where the Shogun lived. And the Shogun has ordered a series of exhibition matches. He wants to see whose style is the best, whose sword style. We see Munafuyo Yagyu, the official swords master of the shogunate, and then the brothers Toshikata and Genpo Yagyu of the Owari Han. We've met them before in many issues of Kamui. And here's the Shogun. So we see one initial match here and some nice fight choreography comparing the two different styles of these swordsmen. But then the big match, the one the Shogun really wants to see, is between his guy, the one with the top knot here, and or whatever that's called, and Munafuyo and Genpo of the Owari Han, because everyone knows that the Owari are kind of supposedly have the best sword technique. I guess it's never been proven, but they have some really rare techniques that nobody seems to be able to figure out. So the Shogun really wants to see if they can beat his guy. Everyone's breathless in the crowd because they all know about the reputation of the Owari sword style. They're both Yagyu clans, but they definitely have a rivalry. So the match begins. And some pretty cool fighting here, but not much of it because the very first clash, it looks like Munafuyo doesn't even realize it. And it's just a wooden sword, but Genpo kind of dealt him a crippling blow. He starts bleeding, and then all of a sudden, his arm looks like it spasms, and he drops his sword, and he's totally injured, and he can't fight anymore. Later on, he's grousing with his one of his retainers, and the retainer's saying, "I didn't know the warrior was so skilled." And Munafuyo is just like, "God damn it. That Genpo's way better than I heard." Meanwhile, a stranger comes to visit the castle, and it's Juzo Makuta. If you remember, Juzo is the father of Koyota, the little boy who's been searching for his father, who's also the master of that, I can't remember the name of the technique, but it's basically the drop dead and roll over technique where they, like the centipede and 5 deadly venoms. It's all about falling on the ground and then attacking your foe from below. So he basically is, Juzo is just a wandering Ronin. He just wanders around Japan trying to improve his swordsmanship, having matches with the various masters. And he asks for a match. At first they say, "No, we can't. There's a rule against it because you're from a different school." But, of course, Munafuyo is injured. But I guess the second in command agrees to fight him. And so they begin their match. It looks like wooden swords again. It's just a friendly match. And it looks like it's a draw. And then this guy comes in, who I'm not sure who this guy is. He seems to be the authority there. They don't mention his name. I'm not sure who it is. So Juzo is very grateful. He says, thank you for fighting me, so I could see your technique. It was very helpful. Thank you. So when he leaves, they're like, this guy in authority, this head honcho, he says, that really wasn't a draw. If that was a real duel, you would have lost your foot. He actually won that. And they basically are like, yeah, he's a really good swordsman, even though he's like, not aligned with any school or any Han. And Munafuyo says, it seems like he's conveniently fallen into our hands. We can use him. And so Munafuyo says, I'll arrange it immediately. So now we see Juzo walking away with his young squire. I'm sure there's a word in Japanese for this kid, but he's a squire, basically. And Juzo says the same thing to his squire. He says, yeah, that guy wasn't very good, actually. I would have chopped his foot off if those were real swords. He was pretty mediocre. But he's still glad that, he got to have his match. And then he says, let's go home. So I guess this is their hometown, and they're in a restaurant. And all of a sudden, these bullies show up and basically just start hassling him. I like how Juzo just says, I'm afraid we're having dinner right now. Why don't you go away and harass us later? Well, I guess these guys are called the Kurenayagumi. And I guess they've been terrorizing this area for a long time. Nobody stands up to them. But basically, Juzo convinces them at least to come outside so they don't disturb the restaurant patrons. And by this dry riverbed, he agrees to fight them. And he just cuts through these guys like a Sith through wheat. So gory. He's chopping off hands, chopping off feet, doing his crazy little rolling technique. Man, so many hands are flying and feet everywhere. He's like a Cuisinart. And then basically almost all of them are dead. And then the leader, who's been holding back the whole time, he pulls out a gun and says, now you die. But then a mysterious figure shows up and he says, it is finished. The leader whips around to shoot him, and it's Munafuyo. Munafuyo throws a knife into his wrist, cuts him in half with a sword, and throws another knife at the one remaining bad guy. Runs him through. And Munafuyo informs him. He says, yeah, these guys have been causing trouble for a long time. Thanks for getting rid of them. And then he takes off his hood and tells Juzo that he's Munafuyo Yagyu. That's who he really wanted to see earlier. But of course, Munafuyo couldn't have a match with him because his hand is hurt. So Juzo's pretty impressed. And they, to be continued. Number 31, Duel Before the Shogun Part 2. So here's the Yagyu mansion in Edo. I like these nice establishing shots. Just slowly leading us into the story. And so inside the Yagyu mansion, we see Munafuyo, and he's talking to, he's invited Juzo into his mansion. And he's saying how, I could recommend you. You could be a real samurai. You could be in the service of a daimyo, which is basically like being like a full-on knight to a nobleman back in the Middle Ages, like a real respected samurai. And he's kind of humble. He's just like, I'm just a provincial samurai. I don't know. And Munafuyo is all buttering him up and just saying, I got connections. I could, maybe you should contact the Award Yagyu. And Juzo's very appreciative. He says, thank you very much for, helping me out. And then He has another match. I guess they really want to see how good he is. The stumbling over technique again. And he basically says, you can stay at my mansion for the night. You must be very tired from all your traveling. So the next day, he thanks him once again. Juzo says, thanks for all you've done. And he says, hey, actually, would you do me a favor? Since you're going to go see the Owari anyway, would you deliver this secret message to them? It must be handed directly to Lord Genpo. No one else can touch it. And he's honored that he trusts him with such an important mission. And so he takes off with his squire. And this thing, I don't know if it's going to be something in a future issue, but apparently there's a burr on his back, on Juzo's back, and his squire notices it, picks it off. And Juzo says, how did that end up on my back? But Juzo thinks to himself, could it have been placed there during my match? So I don't know what that means, because in these 4 issues, at least, we don't find out if it's relevant at all. And so here, once again, we see Mutafuyu, and they're basically imagining what will happen. Basically, that note that Juzo is supposed to deliver, what it actually says is, there is evidence that the samurai is conspiring against the Yagyu. We can't finish him off here in Edo, so I send him to you under the guise of a recommendation. Please kill him as soon as you finish reading this letter. And so we see how it's going to play out. And their ideal fit, dream is that they both kind of kill each other. It looks like Juzo chops off his foot, but Genpo kills Juzo. But this is all just in their head. They're just fantasizing about what hopefully will happen when it comes to pass. And so on the way to Lord Genpo's, to the Owari Han, they're attacked. And Juzo makes short work of this guy. So now we're in Owari, the Owari Han. And we see the 2 brothers, and one of them's worried. He's a little off on his game today. And he says, I'm a little stressed out about something. One of our spies in the Edo mansion, the one we just saw, this spy has conveyed information that Lord Mutafuyu has sent us a secret dispatch. But I'm more worried about the courier. He uses a rather unusual sword technique. And so they think it could be an assassin, because they know that the Edo Yagyu are pretty pissed at them for besting them in front of the shogun. And they talk about how basically, we have better swordsmanship than the Edo Yagyu, but they're very good at intrigue and deception. So you always got to keep your be on your toes with those guys. So I believe this is the brother of Genpo. He says, I got a plan. I'll finish him off before he even arrives in the castle town. The entire matter will be settled as if the courier merely vanished. talking about Juzo. And I assume they're in a worry. And all of a sudden, Juzo says, "Leave me," to a squire, because these guys come out of the mist. I really like that panel, the way they, the mist is everywhere, and they're just coming out like from a monster movie or something. And these guys all circle him. And once again, he just starts rolling and spinning. He's like a break dancer. He's like doing the electric boogaloo. And he's just chopping off hands and arms once again. It's amazing. And now we're back to the present. If you remember this guy with the Richard Nixon nose, he was last 2 issues ago. And so basically he's telling Kamui the story. And he says no one has seen Juzo since then. So apparently it's kind of weird. We don't see the end of the fight. But next issue they kind of tell us that, yes, Juzo died during this battle. Okay, number 32. We're back to some of these gross colors. It's just really weird. Part 3 of Duel Before the Shogun. So now we see the monk's back in the picture, that crazy monk. And he's telling a story about how 10 years ago he first met Juzo. And he was walking through the mountains. The winter snows were just starting to melt. And he rounded a corner and came upon a bear with her cubs. And he starts sweating. The thing is, he could probably take the bear with his skill. But he knows that with the snows melting, he's just like, "Stop, you stupid beast." Because he starts growling and roaring, the bear. It causes an avalanche. And he knew that would happen. That's why he was like, "Shut up, you dumb bear." And the bear and cubs try to run and escape. And then meanwhile, we see a younger Juzo. And he notices it. He says, "Snow slide." And so the poor bear family get all crushed by the snow. And Juzo's thrilled. He's like, "A bear, what luck. You got a free bear without even having to hunt it." He's already skinned it, it looks like, that night. And it looks like he found the monk. The monk was pretty banged up. And his wife is taking care of the monk. And they feed him some bear meat stew. And then the next day in that town, there's a little incident. These samurai are hunting. And they're just totally galloping through these peasants' fields. And the peasants run out and they're like, "Please, I beg you, please stop. We just we just did the spring transplanting. If you guys go trampling through our fields, it'll really screw up the crop. Please, we beg you." Because they know they're not even, samurai are the higher caste. So they're being very, obsequious about it. But they're also just like, "Really, guys, the whole crop will be ruined. It'll really, please just go right around." And these samurai are just arrogant cunts, and they just knock them down with their horses. And they're just like, "How dare you talk to samurai?" And Juzo shows up. And Juzo basically challenges them, and they're just shocked. They're like, "A peasant daring to lecture a samurai?" Because Juzo basically says, if you damage the seedling fields, it'll make for a poor harvest. Even samurai should be sensible enough to realize that. Because samurai have to eat. Those peasants, if they can't grow crops, then nobody gets to eat. And so basically he introduces himself as Juzo Makuta, the country samurai. That sounds like a great CBS TV show from the 70s. And I guess he's like a country samurai. Were the descendants of minor lords. So they're basically like low-level samurai, like kind of low on the totem pole. But technically they are samurai. And so, of course, the samurai guys attack him. And he, he whips this pail at the horse's head and knocks him over. And he beats the crap out of these samurai. And all he's got is a pole. They've got swords. He's just got a wooden pole. So meanwhile, back at his household, we see that crazy monk. And the townspeople come running back and they tell him what's going on. And then Juzo shows up. He looks pretty beat up, but he won. And I guess the two samurai took off. He knocked out one of them and the other guy grabbed him and, you know, got out of there. So Juzo's a pretty cocky, arrogant guy. He's just like, I'm fine. I showed those guys. And his Juzo's wife basically tells the monk, like, you know, he's the kind of guy who always stands up for people when there's trouble. I know it's a good thing to do that, but I just worry about him. I just think one day he's going to write a check his ass can't cover. And so the monk kind of repeats that to him. He basically says, you know, you've got a really good, you know, like raw, savage fighting style, but you better be careful, you know. Don't take on more than you can handle, because your poor wife doesn't want to lose you. Look at this great panel here. So I guess the monk bids them farewell. He's wandering through this beautiful natural setting, and all of a sudden he hears a scream, and it's Juzo's wife. And these ne'er-do-wells are gonna rape her. And the monk is still injured. So, you know, the monk, we've seen him before. He could take on like 70 guys, but he's just kind of watching because he's got two cracked ribs. But it doesn't matter because Juzo shows up. And once again, he's just got a big wooden pole. And we basically see those two samurai from earlier who are riding through the field, and they're just laughing. I guess they set this whole thing up. And so Juzo does have a very, just a natural ability at warfare. He's just a really good fighter, naturally. He's taking on all these guys. Man, this is some great action shit. That's some nice stuff. But then it looks like he's met his match. The leader of this gang, he seems, I think he's, you know, Juzo can't take him. And so they clash once more, and all of a sudden the guy falls over dead. And it turns out that the monk threw a dagger into his neck. So Juzo didn't really kill him in this clash here. Maybe he wounded him, but the killing blow was the monk's knife. And the monk says, hey, I owed you one. You saved my life. It's the least I can do. And so the monk says, see what I was saying before? You know, you took on too many guys. If I wasn't around, you would have been dead, and your poor wife would be left a widow. And he's like, you must be a great swordsman. Please teach me. And he begs the monk to teach him. And the monk agrees. He says, okay, you can be my disciple. And I'll teach you the ways just for your wife's sake. I don't want your poor wife to have to be a widow. Oh, God, look at these colors, guys. It's actually kind of neat. It's so bad. It's kind of cool looking. So number 33, Duel Before the Shogun Part 4. And so that's what happens. Basically, I don't know, it seems like weeks and months go by, and the monk trains Juzo in swordplay. And he's a very harsh taskmaster. He's just beating the crap out of Juzo, basically. Really fun training scenes in this. So that's where Juzo learned that rolling technique. So the monk's all like, so your training is going to be really severe. For starters, you got to roll down this cliff. And he just pushes him off this cliff. He's like, yeah, it's the best way to learn how to roll. I mean, he could have totally died, cracked his head on a rock or something, but he doesn't care. And so he lands, and this tree lands on him. And he says, what happened to your sword? You lost your sword. If a real sword touches your body as you roll, you'll be cut. So you got to learn how to roll with a sword. So he grabs the sword and this time just does it by himself. And he's rolling down the mountainside, and a giant boulder almost kills him. And he drops his sword, and the sword almost impales him when it lands. So he's got a lot of work to do. We see him practicing over and over. I like these scenes of nature, kind of imply that, you know, time is passing. This is not just a few days. This is a long time he's training. This is kind of crazy. He's got this like pendulum-like thing that attacks Juzo, and he lies on the ground and defends himself. And there's like 2 of them. And the whole time his poor wife is going to watch this shit. She's going to be like, oh God, he's going to get killed. I love this kind of stuff in like martial arts movies, the training scenes. More of this nature stuff. So we see him just lying in this stream with his sword like under the surface of the water. And he just starts slashing and killing these, what are those kind of birds? Skylarks? I don't know what they're called. Whippoorwills? Starlings? And he's just chopping them out of the sky. And so the monk says, hey, he's ready. And so they kind of have almost like a graduation or a thesis match to see if Juzo was learned enough. And Juzo's a lot better now. This is, I love this fight scene. This is a great fight scene with the crazy rolling. This is just totally fun. Attack. And so I guess he graduates. The monk thinks he's good enough. Meanwhile, once again, the wife's alone at the house, and these bad guys show up. And it looks like they're going to rape her. And they run her down, but then Juzo hears her screams, and he runs back to his house to defend his wife. They've got her hostage with a sword right in her throat. And it's weird. Juzo just kneels down, throws his sword away, and kneels down. Because I guess this technique is more of a defensive thing. So I figure he figures he'll draw them in, and then he'll use this technique. They think he's defenseless. And so they attack, and he's totally rolling around, evading their blows, and then he grabs a sword. He rolls into the vicinity of his sword, and then it's just a fucking lawnmower man again. He's just chopping him down. God, that panel's so great. The motion there. You could tell like a guy like Paul Pope looked at shit like this. It kind of reminds me of Paul Pope art. Look at this guy. Has the whole bottom of his legs chopped off. So he kills all the guys. The wife runs up and she's crying. You know, happy though that he rescued her. And now we're back to the present. And the monk has taken off his Nixon mask. And he says, yes, but only a few years later he was dead. And it's all because I took it upon myself to teach him Kusanagi. That's the style name, Kusanagi. And because of that, he says, I cannot forgive the Yagyu. We got another little historical lesson here about the Shogun's ninja. That's a good movie title. So there you go, guys. We're almost at the end of The Legend of Kamui. I'm just so excited to see how it wraps up. Even though technically it's not the end. Eclipse just published this one bit of Kamui's history. Kamui has years before this, and then with other artists, there's years after this. But they figured this was the most exciting story, I guess, to introduce American readers to. So that's why we're looking at this. I think in the first episode I was confused. Maybe I wasn't, but I think I might have said these were from the 80s. But now that I read an article on the internet, I think this was an offshoot of the normal Kamui series that ran in Garu from like 63-ish to 71-ish. This is in 67. He did this little story, Kamui Gaiden, and I think that's what this is from, which would make it the late 60s. Then again, I could be totally wrong. The article was a little confusing. So just wanted to clarify that. Then again, I might have said that the first episode and forgotten. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. Well, it kind of does matter, but suffice to say, good stuff. And I guess in maybe a week or two, we're going to have the last chapter of The Legend of Kamui. Thanks for watching, guys, and I hope to see you next time here at the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.